Hi everyone, we are from Group 12 and we are going to present on the fermentation and specifically fermentation in kimchi. So first of all, we have to know what is the definition of the fermentation. So food fermentation is when the metabolites produced by the fermenting organism during food fermentation limit the growth of spoilage and pathogenic organism, extending the shelf life of perishable food. In order to preserve and transform food components, fermentation is a technology that makes use of the development and metabolic process of microbes. There are several types of food fermentations which will be discussed later. Next, we go to types of common fermentation. There are 4 types of common fermentation, which are lacto-fermentation, acidic fermentation, alcohol fermentation, and alkaline fermentation. First, we go to lacto-fermentation. The term lacto refers to lactic acid, which is a type of acid that produced upon the breakdown of sugar in an oxygen-free environment. Lacto-fermentation involves the use of lactic acid producing bacteria, primarily from the Lactobacillus genus, as well as yeast. These bacteria degrade carbohydrates in food to produce lactic acid and, in certain cases, alcohol or carbon dioxide. Examples included fermented milks, yogurt, pickles, kimchi, and sourdough bread. Next, we go to acetic acid fermentation. Vinegar is another name for acetic acid. It is one of the oldest known fermentation processes. It forms naturally as a result of wine spoilage. Starches and sugars from grains and fruit ferment produce sour vinegar and condiments using this method. Acetobacter is the most commonly reported genus in vinegar production. Apple cider vinegar, wine vinegar, and kombucha are a few examples. Next, we go to alcohol fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation is a complex biochemical process in which yeast transform to pyruvate, a consequence of glycolysis or the breakdown of glucose in starches or sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide molecules. Alcoholic fermentation is carried out by yeast and some other fungi and bacteria such as Zymomas mobilis. Alcoholic fermentation is the process through which alcoholic beverages such as wine and beer are produced. Lastly, alkaline fermentation. Alkaline fermentation uses high-protein source materials such as fish, beans, and oilseeds to ferment them into condiments. Some anti-nutrients and toxins found in alkaline fermentation substrates are only edible after being detoxified by fermentation. Bacillus subtilis typically aids in the alkaline fermentation process. This bacterium is found on untreated grains and thrives in hot settings. Natto, daochi, and kinema are examples of alkaline fermentation foods.
Now, we are going to talk about the main microorganism used in the fermentation process. Lactic acid bacteria are the predominant microbiota in all non-fermented foods and drinks, and they are thought to be the primary factor in fermented foods and beverages' health benefits. The primary fermenting bacteria include Enterococcus species, Streptococcus faecilis, Leuconostoc species, Lactobacillus brevis, and Pediococcus species.
A number of health benefits are associated with fermentation. In fact, fermented foods are often more nutritious than their unfermented form. Fermentation can improve digestive health. The probiotics produced during fermentation can help restore the balance of friendly bacteria in your gut and may alleviate some digestive problems. Fermentation also boosts your immune system. Due to their high probiotic content, fermented foods can give your immune system a boost and reduce your risk of infections like the common cold. Furthermore, fermentation also can make food easier to digest. Fermentation helps break down nutrients in food, making them easier to digest. Fermentation also benefits the heart. Fermented foods have been associated with a lower risk of heart disease. Probiotics may also modestly reduce blood pressure and help lower total and bad LDL cholesterol. Lastly, fermentation increases flavor of foods. Fermentation adds a new depth of flavor to fermented foods. Hazard associated with fermentation is biological hazard. Bacteria, virus, and parasites that can cause foodborne illness are the biggest concern. Botulism, E. coli, and Salmonella are the main hazard for fermented foods. Botulism can form in oxygen-free conditions if fermentation is not successful and acid levels are too low. For E. coli and Salmonella will form when sanitation practices are not followed.
The kind and type of fermented foods would come next. So in this video, we will discuss 4 categories of fermented foods, which include meat products, dairy goods, drinks, and vegetable items. The first category consists of meat items including salami, sucuk, pepperoni, naan, and also fouet. Then comes dairy goods. Yakult, kefir, cheese, yogurt, and curd are a few examples. The third type is beverages. Beer, cider, kombucha, sake, and wine are a few examples of fermented drinks. Vegetable products are the final section of fermented food. Tempeh, natto, kimchi, miso, and sauerkraut are some of the instances. Among all of the stated fermented foods, our group will talk specifically about kimchi in the next slide.
Okay, let's get into kimchi. Kimchi is a traditional Korean fermented food. It is composed of majorly lactic acid bacteria such as Licornostal, Lactobacillus, and Weissila. Kimchi is made by using salted cabbage and various seasoning including garlic, scallion, and jeotgal, which is fermented seafood. And the bacterial culture that cause the fermentation are from the raw ingredient itself. So this is how fermentation of kimchi is happening. First of all, Licornostal, Lactobacillus, and also Weissila from the raw ingredients will cause spontaneous fermentation of the kimchi. The salting process, 2 to 5% of concentration, will draw the water from the vegetables. Next, seasoning will be added and penetrate into the kimchi over time. Lactic and acetic acid will form at optimum pH of 4.2, which is acidic. And lastly, kimchi will ferment at room temperature in 1 to 2 days or mostly in the refrigerator.
Next, we move to factors affect on kimchi fermentation. There are 4 factors can affect the kimchi fermentation. The first one is salts and salting condition. Salting process may up to 3 to 15 hours depends on the salt concentration, temperature, cutting method, and lastly, size of the ingredients. Salting can reduce moisture content, relative volume, weight, and affect the physical properties of the kimchi. The optimum pH of kimchi is around 4.2. The second one is temperature. Ambient temperature is used in kimchi fermentation. The optimum ripening time and the edible period of kimchi vary depends on the fermentation temperature and salt concentration. The third one is raw materials. Fermentation rate is affected by selection of raw materials quality and formulation of kimchi ingredients with seasoning. Garlic inhibit the growth of unnecessary microorganisms. Hot pepper promote fermentation of kimchi. Green onion and leek retards the fermentation of kimchi due of its antimicrobial activity. Starch and sugar promote the fermentation of kimchi and contribute to the harmony of taste. And lastly, natural preservative. Lactic acid bacteria can cause over-ripening or over-acidification. To overcome this problem is to control the growth of LAB without destroying of quality of the kimchi. Medical plants effective for preserving kimchi. Herbs and spices high antimicrobial activity against microorganisms in kimchi. Fruits and vegetables significant bactericidal effects such as pine tree leaves, persimmon, and oak.
Let's look at the study on the lactic acid bacteria in the kimchi. So according to the multi-omics analysis, the fermentation was carried out by lactic acid bacteria indigenous to the kimchi cabbage and garlic.
and not by the microorganism derived from other raw materials such as the ginger and the red pepper. For the kimchi that is fermented by kimchi cabbage-derived microorganism, the analysis shows the strains of the genus Leuconostoc, Weissila and Lactobacillus as the most dominant in the community. While for the kimchi fermented by the microorganism from the garlic, the strains in the Leuconostoc and Weissila were the most dominant. Next, let's look at the basic chemical principle of lactic acid fermentation in the kimchi. The main principle is to derive the energy from the carbohydrate in the absence of oxygen, and also the conversions of pyruvate into lactic acid as the end product by the lactic acid bacteria in the kimchi, like the Lactobacillus. So firstly, the glucose will be oxidized to the pyruvate by glycolysis, and also during the process, ATP will be produced as the main product, and it is generated by the phosphorylation at the substrate level during the glycolysis. Next, in the absence of external electron acceptor, the pyruvate will undergo a reduction to the lactate, also with the regeneration of NAD+ by the lactate dehydrogenase. And lastly, the lactate, which is the conjugate form of lactic acids, it will be converted into lactic acid as the end product of the fermentation.
Fermented food has become one of the top 10 food trends worldwide. Due to high demands, food companies took advantage by responding to this food trend by commercializing traditional fermented foods or come up with new invention of fermented foods. Fermented foods provide varying flavor characteristics, texture, and health benefits in which this gives chances and open opportunity for food companies to seize this opportunity to diverse fermented products in the market. And that's all from us. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.